I'm the one of the two main hosts at the Brothers Crin, and on the History Corner over on YouTube, and of course, as said, Brothers Crin over on Storyfire as well. So do subscribe to all these channels and to Vinofire over on Storyfire, and to the main Storyfire channel as well, because you've got this great reading that you're doing, this audiobook of Mark Twain's Jeanne d'Arc.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
I listened to and had a lot of fun listening to that while I was writing. So that was a great deal of fun.
I've started recording part 2, and I think I've made some improvements, because that's the first time I've ever tried recording an audiobook in my own style.
Mm-hmm.
And this time I've just given it a little bit extra. I learned some lessons in the first one. But please, come listen. You can podcast it. It's really easy. Just put it in your headphones. Hopefully it's all good. But let's crack on with the rest of the first book, Domeremy. Tell me what your initial thoughts are. What are you thinking?
Now, we're looking at everything from chapter 5, I believe, up to chapter 8, correct?
Did we cover the Madman? Joan Tames the Madman? I don't think we did.
Charles de Foucault? I don't think we did. But you mean the madman who breaks into the village?
Yes.
Out of the little imprison. Yeah, I think we touched on it lightly last time.
Yeah.
But not in much detail. I think that we could start there since you mentioned it. Now, that guy was imprisoned for murder, and Jeanne began to tame him as though he were, I don't want to be disrespectful, but as though he were a wounded dog.
Yeah.
Or something. And it really reminded me of, to an extent, not Call of the Wild, but White Fang. You know how you have the one Californian man who tames White Fang through simple acts of generosity and food and whatnot, when White Fang's a beaten down, enraged, almost rabid wolf dog. And here, this criminal is in a similar frame of mind, and he scares off all the children who think he's coming to murder them, and they run away quite reasonably. But Jeanne, whom is operating in a different kind of sphere of thinking, ends up just approaching him and whatnot. That scene was an interesting one. It was very biblical in the sense that, she's approaching rather, it's like, let all the sinners come to me and I'll forgive them.
Yeah, very much so.
I don't think that's a quote from the Bible, but there is something of that mindset with the story of Jesus, also with Buddha. At the same time, this is setting the groundwork for the later character of Linné, the dwarf.
Yeah.
Who's going to be one of the major characters later in the novel. So we can, because Jeanne kind of tames him in a similar fashion. But this is the first time she really kind of tames a wild rabid man. But of course, he dies tragically in his cage, imprisoned, unable to escape.
In the very next chapter.
Is burnt down.
In the very next chapter.
Yeah.
What I found particularly interesting about this chapter as well is that the opening paragraph sets the tone for you to try and remember each of their sort of like their we say nicknames in English. I can't remember what he says, but you don't use the term nicknames, do you, in Northern America? But like pet names for each other. And he consistently throughout the chapter uses that.
Yep.
To introduce that concept for the book, I've noticed.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's a basic point.
Because all the characters, most of the characters operate with these. Oh, I'm in the wrong chapter. Most of these characters do operate with their little pet names.
Yes.
And now, weirdly, when I was growing up, ironically, the French little conservative community I grew up in, and I went to school at, up in way to the north of Ontario, ironically, all the kids my age did come up with pet names for each other. Sometimes they were insults more than anything. My dad hated his childhood, one of his two childhood names, which was a mocking twisting of our surname. And so he ended up bullied throughout his childhood with that name. But the other nickname he got was one that he really liked and that he thought was funny, Pie, because he really liked pie growing up. Me, I mostly got insults. Really.
Same.
But some of my other friends got these funny little nicknames and pet names, which were really, really, really funny. And most of the time, they're not that bad, but sometimes you do get these not so great.
My two pet names were given to me by my granddad, and they stung like nothing. Even to this day, if I hear them, they hurt me. He called me Squiddling Mass because he said that my arms and legs went in every direction at all times, so I was never in control of my body. So he called me a Squiddling Mass, and Big Girl's Blouse because he said I cried too much. And they were the only pet names I had.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, at one point I got beaten up by, I'm not going to mention who, but I came from a background which wasn't always pleasant, and I got nicknamed Le Planichel at one point because I got beaten up badly enough that when I went to school a few days later after my beating, I kind of cried, and so the other kids called me the crybaby, Le Planichel, and that one stung.
It stings, doesn't it?
The other one was, yeah, it does sting. It does sting. And the problem is, after that, I refused to ever cry, so that in high school I got called the stiff upper lip because I just, no matter what, I wouldn't cry. So I went from one extreme to the other, and that got a little funny.
But this is important because
one was growing up. Yeah, this was this is almost more a European thing, amongst the English, the Scottish, and the French. It's something we seem to share in common, and this is something Twain is very aware of to an extent. And later, when we get to the Robert the Bruce and the Pillars of the Earth novels, we're going to see the nicknames and the pet names come in with the various characters like Jack Jackson, even Tom the Builder, and even, with Robert the Bruce, there's a few characters who have them. So this is something that it's so fascinating because Mark Twain is not culturally European. He's American, and yet, he's very aware of this, and he's playing these little tricks. And oftentimes these nicknames do sting. Although I remember I also got one funny one, which was, what was it? Le tout savant, which is to say the all-knowing.
I was just going to say, know it
that
all.
One I got.
That sounds like
that was I was flattered, but it was also a sarcastically given.
I got that as a kid.
I was very smarmy as a little kid, and
I got that as a kid. Sam the know-it-all, and I always used to go, "So you are admitting I know it all," and which is a very know-it-all response to being called a know-it-all. The irony.
Yeah.
But the reason I just felt that this was, like you say, it's quite a warming opening bit because we all feel comfortable more with our pet names almost. That, in the end, our pet names start to help us identify who we are. Without those names, it's almost impossible to gain any sort of self-understanding. Because if it sticks, then it means there's some truth in it.
Yeah, and another one I got was le sarcastique, the sarcastic.
Yeah, of course.
One, and as a kid. But I actually liked that one and the all-knowing. But then you got others like the crybaby, which negatively affected me psychologically for a long time, so that you get these little pet names, and your personality will bounce between them and whatnot. And at least from what I've observed with little kids, and even amongst your relatives, you're going to be given several.
Yeah.
Throughout your childhood, and they're all going to affect you. And Jeanne, in this, at the beginning of this chapter, gets given several. The bashful.
Yeah.
She was also called the patriot, which she was called the beautiful. And now Louis hurries to mention this was not merely because of the extraordinary beauty of her face and form, but because of the loveliness of her character.
Yeah.
That paragraph also got me thinking, because it just seems like Louis just heaping praise upon praise on Jeanne. And paragraphs like this always end up making me think that the narrator's kind of smitten with her.
You said this last time, and I agree. I agree totally.
Yeah.
This is a love letter. Yeah. This is a love letter. Very much so.
And of course, she gets la vaillant, or la preuse. That's probably what I think it would translate as in French, or the brave.
Yes.
But here he chose the word brave, which I shouldn't criticize Twain's linguistic skills, but I actually don't think the brave would be the correct, it seems a bit too simple a word to use. And I think that the valiant would have been a better word used here. And
interesting.
At least that's what I think. And maybe I shouldn't criticize his choice in wording, but I just think brave is a bit of I like the word, but it's a bit boring compared to valiant, because valiant also has connotations of honor and of, almost intrepidness.
Yeah, so you wouldn't associate the word valiant. You wouldn't associate the word valiant with a bad guy, but a bad guy could be brave. Corey's brave. He's bad, but he's brave. Just so dusting off my
valor. Is heroic.
Yeah, brave is neutral. That's a good point. I really like that. What I would say as well is the takeaway from this chapter is this really sets the tone for who the paladin is. The paladin is...
I love paladin.
I know you do. He's self-indulgent with his views. He loves himself. He never takes away a moment to find a good spin on himself. And the others are aware of it. They joke about it. They find humour in it. But there's always a way to which he can make himself feel better about himself. And so he ran away from the madmen, but then it's, I was caught by surprise. I didn't realise. I would have done the same. Blah, 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 blah. And then he turns it into, well, you wait till I go off. I would go to war, but, I'm not high enough. So they're just going to make me a private. And so what difference can I make? But if I was a general, then it'd be fine. And it's this whole self-aggrandizing language. And yet the others take it with good humour. So they almost get him and understand. And
they adore him.
Yeah, he sets the tone. I like this chapter.
But about Paladin, which I really find interesting. In some ways, I'm going to poke a bit of fun at both the English and the French. He has all of the boastfulness of both cultures.
Yeah.
Like all the negative traits of both our cultures. But when push comes to shove, he does at a few points show all the positive characteristics of both cultures.
Yes.
And I do think that there is a boastfulness in both French culture and in English culture where we're self-aggrandizing, and in some ways we are. And at least a lot of Englishmen and Frenchmen, and even a few French women I've met, have this self-aggrandizing characteristic of paladin. But it's something that weirdly I always laugh at.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I've read this book as a kid, and I always find it funny to listen to people like that. I guess I'm more like Noel in some ways, who he just pushes and instigates these bad habits. But yeah, like Paladin does seem to have like the self-indulgence, the self-aggrandizement, the boastfulness of both the English and the French.
Very much so. I'm just putting my torch on because I can barely read my book, let alone my notes. So let's go into chapter 5. We've already touched on it, and I don't know how much there is to take from it, but it's that I feel like this is a catalyst moment where the town comes to realise that there is a bigger world. It's not just them.
Yeah.
I think Joan has already worked this out. She's obviously been having these visions, but the town suddenly, there's a moment in it where, so it's the universal truth. Unless a tragedy directly affects us, it's almost like it's not real. And you have this moment where the mayor wants it resolved. Jacques d'Arc wants it resolved because their town has now been ransacked. They didn't care when everyone else around them was being ransacked,
Yep.
but they cared when it happened to them. And I just think this is a good setting stone. It's that it's looking at the microcosm of a mentality turning that needs to be expanded to all of France. And so we're just seeing it on the micro scale before it happens on the macro scale. And I just think this is such an important yet easy missed chapter. What are your thoughts?
Go and steal all my words for me.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I apologise.
The first thing that is notable, at least I felt a great deal of sorrow over the criminal dying in the cage, because, I just found, he dies in that cage, and in a way, his fate is similar to what awaits Jeanne. Spoilers alert, because historically she's imprisoned until she dies due to the Burgundian and the English, and due to French inaction as well. So, which, that entire scene is reminiscent of what's going to happen later. And the thing is, on the other hand, the taxes and the sacking of the city will, that upsets these people, and they go, oh my gosh, there's a larger world out there. You also have Charles Le Fou, the mad king who dies a few weeks after Henry V, so that the people, there's a nickname that's given to Charles Le Fou after he died, Le Bien-Aimé, the well-beloved, because, he outlived the English king, and the deal to sell out most of France to the English should Henry outlive Charles, and Henry didn't. So, the people are grateful but enraged.
Yeah.
But personally, I don't like Charles Le Fou historically because
I don't understand.
Bonkers.
I don't understand. This gesture is not universal. It's very universal.
Yeah.
But just on this chapter, though.
But on the other hand, we also get at the end of this chapter something that we get Paladin basically on page 66 of my edition, it is mentioned that he thinks of Jeanne as the perfect mate for himself.
Yeah.
She's his first love.
Yeah.
That's his ego coming in. But interestingly, Paladin later gets over Jeanne. But he did initially have very strong feelings for her. And this is the first time we also get Louis, who in very strong language expresses disapproval for Paladin. This is the first time he really seems to kind of have it in for him, demonstrating irritation. Like it says, there was no fit mate in our village for Jeanne d'Arc or Joan of Arc. Everyone would have said that. And just the vitriol there, it's like, okay, whoa there, Louis. Yeah, there's no one worthy of Jeanne, but this is a chapter about essentially, the small little village getting affected by the events in the larger world. It's comparable because Dan and I have been reading The Lord of the Rings in French and English for a couple of podcasts that we're going to be doing. And it's comparable to the Nazgul wandering through the Shire. And, that's when you realize that there's a larger world out there outside of the Shire, so to speak, or at least for the hobbits, that's the case. And it's a very important event that the ring wraiths go through the Shire looking for Frodo Baggins. Here, it's not so much a nigh on harmless ring wraith just on an errand. This is, like the war coming home, so to speak.
It touches them.
And we also get Jeanne hinting at what's to come, and she says that she basically asked that Domeremy never be taxed again.
Yeah, I liked that. I liked
she does later request that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good setup. It's a very good setup.
Yeah. Weirdly, I'm going to be honest, chapter 5 and 6, I think it is, when Paladin exerts his claim for her. I think that's chapter 6. No, 7, I mean. I can't remember, but it's in my notes.
When he requests it, and they go to the judge.
Yeah, they go to the judge, and the thing is, like these couple of chapters are some of my favorites in this book. I really like just the seeds being planted, and I really like the events of chapter 5 because we get some of Noah's best lines just about where he's teasing everybody. We got Paladin just at his most vain, and we have Jeanne at her most bashful. And, taxes coming home to roost, and basically the war coming home. This is a great chapter.
Yeah. And I also think there's something...
And it's always when war and taxes come home that people feel the most outraged.
Yeah.
And indignant.
I really like as well the human nature to it, though. Because when anybody feels pain, they have to go through a series of, emotions that get them out of their pain. And the sort of final bit is once you can joke about a situation, you've got over it. And at the end of the chapter, there's a joking side to them. The paladin is saying, well, I would request a dukedom, name me premier peer, and make me hereditary Lord High Constable of France. And they talk about it, there's humour, and then the very last few paragraphs, in turn, each person present was required to say what reward he would demand of the king if he could change places with the paladin and do the wonders the paladin was going to do. There's this humour about them. It's their way of saying... I feel like it's Mark Twain's way of saying the situation moved on. They joked amongst themselves. Because that is human nature. Once you've become comfortable with the situation, which they've just experienced, back to joking. And
they also tease him and marry you to a princess. You're not going to leave that out, are you? He may keep his princesses. I can marry more to my taste.
Yeah.
He's so snobby. He's like, no, not even a princess is worthy of me.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this sort of horrific chapter, but he ends it as human nature ends those situations, and I think that's very well done. I really enjoyed that.
But he also makes a historic commentary about the Capet Valois line. At this time, nobody really wanted their princesses. Gone are the days of Philippe Auguste and Philippe de Belle, where a French princess was the most desired prize in all of France.
Yeah.
At this time, the most desired princesses are probably those of, very likely England, actually. England, maybe a German princess, but nobody's going to be asking for a French one. Maybe even a Spanish one might be in the cards, that what people want. But the Capet Valois line had hit such a muddy position that Paladin is like, well, I don't really want a French princess. No, thank you.
There's better.
Not what I want.
Yeah, he is nothing more than a pauper, and he still has this set of standards in his mind. It's the equivalent of listening to someone when you go, you mention such and such a celebrity. Not for me. Really? Not for you? You wouldn't know? So the rest of the world views this celebrity as beautiful, but you're not interested. Just classic how men talk. It's very much getting into the how men speak. I really like that. Pressing on with chapter 6.
Although what's interesting...
Oh, sorry, go on.
I was just going to comment on the topic of desired princesses. Capet Valois princesses wouldn't be in vogue until probably early in the 16th century. Them and Tudor princesses would be the desired prizes, while during the War of the Roses period, to an extent, or at least mid 15th century, after probably in the 1440s thereabouts, it'd be Scottish princesses, which would be the most sought prizes. So that's just an interesting, just the style or the glory of these princesses. It's going to shift from nation to nation for which one people want to marry. And I'm just going to crack a joke about the Scottish. I love them, but they only get in style in this the 1440s and 1450s, of course.
So
wait a bit long.
We said we'd only be half an hour. Well, we've already probably hit half an hour. So let's press on with chapter 6. And
all right, let's.
My takeaway point
with the chapter 6 and.
I'm going to keep this brief. My takeaway point is Louis' question in the opening page for me, where she says, the case of France, hopeless. And when someone says something's hopeless, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, when someone says something's hopeless, that's you looking for reassurance. You don't have the comprehension or the understanding of a situation. And when you don't understand something, you see no route out, the word hopeless is the word you look for. Sorry, just a bit above that, she says, Agincourt, and that today, it is more than desperate, it is hopeless. And then... the reply, the case of France hopeless? Why should you think that? Tell me. Rather than Joan being baited by this question of fear and anguish, she elicits more response from Louis. She's trying to draw out, what are your real thoughts? Tell me what you really think. Why do you feel it's hopeless? And it's better to reason something
Louis'
out.
Hopelessness is very natural.
Yeah. But yet, Joan doesn't feel this hopelessness.
France in this era is in the same state Scotland was in 1304.
Yeah.
Or 1306. And the thing is, Louis explains, the French house is bankrupt. One half of its property is already in English hands. Our king is shut up with his favorites and fools in inglorious idleness and poverty in a narrow little patch of the kingdom. And he just says, give the whole thing up, pitch his crown. He's ready to pitch his crown into the sewer and run away to Scotland. There are the facts. And she says, that seems to be the situation. Then it's everything. It's just like I said, but to add them together in order to realize what they mean. And she ends up really funny to hear going, that the case of France is hopeless. And she ends up telling him, hope, more than that. France will win her freedom and keep it. Do not doubt it.
Yeah.
And she says it with such confidence, he's now going, what?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, you're just denying the facts. You're in denial.
Yeah.
And she tells him, we're going to beat them. Don't worry. Now, she has foreknowledge. He doesn't. So you have this very interesting conversation of someone who knows the future in someone who doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you have to, it almost feels like, this might sound weird, but a clown show to an extent. Like, she knows everything that's going to happen. Like, she's already read the history book or something. And he's basically just still floundering in the past going, which book have you read?
The classic, it's the classic detective TV series where there's the detective who knows everything and there's the sideshow detective who knows nothing. And that's so that you, the audience, can feel like you relate. And he's created this. There's the character who knows everything, and there's the character who doesn't, and you get to feel like you relate. I think that comes across when she says, when you just brought out, both will have happened before 2 years are sped. Indeed. And who is going to perform all these sublime impossibilities? And this is a deeply, deeply Catholic region. And so, and it highlights that at the beginning. There's only one pope that they would follow, the Pope in Rome. And so she says, God. And so what could Louis reply to that? Because they're Catholic. And she's invoked the God. And it reminded me of, and I've written it down, 2 Kings 6. It's worth reading the account in verse 17. Elisha is begging that his attendant could see the armies of angels that surround them. And so he prays and he says, please let the attendant see it. And then the attendant sees the army of angels surrounding Jerusalem. And I felt like it was invoking that kind of, that imagery as she was saying it. Because, as you said, Louis suddenly seems to grasp.
Yeah, and in chapter 7, he actually sees her saints and her voices, and he's in shock and terrified because he's going, oh God, I saw something I shouldn't have. I'm not allowed to see that. Are they going to kill me? I better, I hope this was a dream.
Yeah.
Makes a mark on a tree, rush home, and he's like, I hope I don't get in trouble.
Mm.
And turns out he's not, because her voice is intended for him to see them. And that was a little interesting. And to turn to the New Testament, it kind of reminded me of the idea of the scales falling from, I think it's Saul or Paul.
Well, it's Saul who becomes Paul,
eyes. Yeah, so that he could see once more.
Yeah. It
kind of reminded me of that, but also of Mais with the burning bush.
I've put down.
He sees this and he feels.
I've put down Moses in this.
What?
I've put down Moses in this.
I put him down in my notes as well. So
nice. I've literally put Moses before Pharaoh on the side here. Funny. Carry on.
Okay, I put it with the burning branch.
Yeah, so that's
where he feels afraid and where he's like.
Yeah, that's why I said before. So Moses before Pharaoh, not as in he's before him, before Pharaoh. So I literally meant the burning bush. Carry on.
Understood. Yeah, where Louis feels this sort of dread because he's like, I've looked upon the divine. Who am I to look upon the divine here?
Mm.
And this is a very natural fear. Like for example, if you or I were to see like God himself or like a manifestation like tomorrow, we'd feel frightened. We'd go, well, this dwarfs our imagination. Like, we're not able to comprehend this on some level.
Mm.
So, Louis reacts very realistically, and Jeanne tries to reassure him and calm him and tell him, like, don't worry, they're not going to smite you. You haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
They've allowed you to see them. This is a gift. And, she kind of reassures him. And then she ends up tasking him with being her herald to Robert de Baudricourt's court, because she needs Louis, who is a nobleman, to go before her and act like, I guess, Aaron with Mais, act as the herald, or Elrond with Gil-galad. Like, he is there to represent her and to put in a good word with her, and also scout out Robert de Baudricourt's court for Jeanne.
Yeah.
And she's going to go with her uncle there, and uncle and niece will, present her suit, which Vaucouleur, the local baron, that's the Robert ends up very, very, very unimpressed by her, to put the but there is something that Mark Twain says, that it is human nature to deify success and scorn defeat.
Yes.
So that when Jeanne is returned home for a brief time in defeat, most people reject her, but Homet and Monguet, I think it is, end up clinging to her, as does Louis. And her dad, Jacques d'Arc, is offended by her and enraged. And this is when Paladin tries to force Jeanne into marriage with him. Yes. And Jeanne destroys his case.
It's brutal.
She destroys him in court and publicly humiliates him.
Well, and I wrote down beside that.
I almost feel bad for that.
But the thing is, I wrote down, ultimately, Edmond Aubray is weak. That's the truth of it in this chapter. He's weak.
Yeah.
He has yet to understand who or what he is. He's still a boy.
Yep. And he has to go on a hero's journey to become the man he will one day be. The boy, the archetype he is as a child is essentially the hero, but the hero is the child archetype variant of the warrior archetype. For those who like mod pop culture, the warrior archetype would be someone like Johnny Lawrence, or Tom Cruise's character Nathan Algren from The Last Samurai.
Yeah.
Or even Boromir. He's a warrior. And the hero is just a dreamer who dreams of being the warrior. And Paladin is... Now, the shadow of the hero is the grandstanding bully, but also a cowardly, sniveling boy.
Yes.
So he is kind of all three of these things as a child. But when Jeanne pegs him as one of her disciples and as her standard bearer later in the story, that is, sorry, spoilers alert, but that is him graduating from, like you said, he's a weak little boy, to this warrior who kind of dominates those around him in a way.
Yeah.
Sorry you excited me there with when you said he's weak.
Yeah.
Yeah, he totally is.
I think
how weak he is.
And not only that, you can tell that Louis is conveying that in that line where he says the paladin had the effrontery to pretend that she had engaged herself to him several years before, and now he claimed a ratification of the engagement. In other words, he couldn't do it himself. He didn't actually go and speak to her and make it happen. He wanted other people to sort it out for him. And while that may have been normal, to take it to court suggests that it shows the weakness of it. Because a strong person would go, she doesn't love me, this isn't happening, this isn't her purpose, let it go. But in his weakness, he went, I'll go to the courts. And he thought, there's no way a girl is going to beat me. When he has seen in the past her actions with the priest, how she beat him. He's seen all these moments, hasn't taken it on board, and in the weakness of his desire has capitulated to this simple idea that the courts are going to fix it. And she overturns that.
When it was her strength that he fell in love with.
Yes.
And yet he thought, I could defeat her strength. Or at least get social pressure put on her so that she'll capitulate to me. And when she doesn't, he ends up folding a wet tissue. Just going, okay, I'm beaten. And and she does it easily. And of course, you've got Louis going, he has the effrontery, which is pretty funny. And Louis himself is, I would argue, the magician archetype. So he's able to weave deceit and truth together and tell a grand tale, and has a silken tongue and a silver pen, I guess you could say, or a feathered pen, I should say. And so you got this great character drama between these characters, with Jeanne just defeating Paladin. I don't want to say her foe, because Paladin is her foe, but he's too far beneath her to be her foe. And
he's the childhood
like
rival.
This moment will ultimately...
He's a childhood rival. And what happens to our childhood rivals? They so frequently end up becoming our friends.
Yep. She defeats him. But one thing to bear in mind is that while this is going to be a crushing defeat for him, later he does do something very interesting. He pretty much kneels before her and begs for her forgiveness, which she grants, which is very similar, and the scene is very similar to the scene with the hair washing of the feet of Jesus.
Yeah, Mary.
I don't know.
Mary, she cries upon his feet.
Part that is,
so it's Luke 7, and right at the end, he's in the house of a Pharisee, and one of the prostitutes comes in and weeps upon his feet and washes his feet with her tears and hair. And it's one of my favourite portions of the Bible, because it's the dichotomy of pride and humility, because Jesus allows the room to fill with pride, where they're sat there going, how could he let that happen? He surely knows she's a woman of ill repute. But then, as the pride in the room expands with their self-righteousness, he engages and goes and starts asking questions and leads them to a trap. And then he forgives her of her sins. So she walks away inflated, and they all walk away deflated from the situation. And I just think it's one of my favourite portions. I'm sure it's Luke 7, 40 something. One of the best stories ever. Sorry, I interrupted you. You triggered my favourite moment in the Bible. And sorry, in my interruption, I just wanted to also suggest one other biblical thing that I noticed in this, that this is setting up this chapter 8, why the scorners relented. In John 12, there's this moment where there's a miracle that God does from heaven for Jesus, basically declaring that Jesus was his son. And many in the room put faith in him, but won't do it publicly because they have a fear of being expelled. And this is human nature. Like, even if something phenomenal happens, we still won't do it for fear of recourse. A classic case example right now, no one is talking about aliens, okay? For fear that people will laugh at you. Like, oh, really? You believe in aliens and spaceships? The blooming Pentagon is releasing videos of spacecraft. The news aren't covering it. I talked to someone today, they'd never even heard of this. I went, you've never heard of this? He went, nope. I went, look it up, it's on YouTube. The Pentagon have released footage of what could be alien vehicles. But for fear of what people might think of you, no one's talking about it. And we see here, right at the end, she gains that victory. And so the fickle village turned again and gave Joan countenance, compliment and peace. Her mother took her back to her heart, and even her father relented and said he was proud of her. It's the fickleness. We have to have a certain gravitas to allow our opinions to exist. No one has the confidence to be secure in their own opinion. Even her parents, who've raised her and know how wonderful she is as a daughter. It's such a well-conceived version of human nature, I think. It's very well conceived.
Yeah. It does show the fickleness of humanity. Yeah. And in that regard, I find that part of this story a little depressing, because it's not exactly showing the best side of people.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, it's almost amusing, just in how I'm looking at my notes, and just in how most of them turn on her and then turn back to side with her. And yet there are three people who don't ditch her cause. You know, like her two besties and Louis.
Yeah.
Which, on the other hand, like, these three characters are going to, you know, exert a certain influence over Jeanne. And, like, two of them, she's going to end up wishing, you know, to go back to an extent, you know, throughout the story. And they're basically her surrogate sisters, while Louis is going to follow after her throughout the entire story, a quiet observer of all the great events of her life. And oftentimes, now there's another thing he does in these chapters I noticed, primarily from Dostoevsky's work, as well as a bit from Conrad, and that's that Louis acts like a very judgmental narrator, you know, against Paladin and a few others. And the reason I'm mentioning Dostoevsky and Conrad is that the narrators in their stories are active characters, but they'd often end up judging certain characters and favoring the main, like, in terms of like, for example, Lord Jim, a novel I really like, deifying Jim, for example.
Yes. That's
what the narrator does in the story of Lord Jim. And the trouble is, Jim's not worthy of it. He's not worthy of the deification. And the narrator turns even Jim's failures into victories in a very, very humorous, almost, well, I find it very fun. But here he's admitting that Jeanne, you know, has suffered her defeats and her setbacks, but he kind of flouts it aside and says, yes, but that's, you know, like, people are fickle, and turns it into a reprimand of the rest of everyone else, and still tries to deify her with it. And this is a very, I don't know, it just reminds me of Dostoevsky and Conrad a little.
It makes sense.
And they're not my favorite authors. I do like them. But Twain is using, like, these chapters feel like they're written almost by those two. So,
well, but Dostoevsky was post Mark Twain, was he not? Similar era?
I can't remember.
Dostoevsky was...
Similar era. I know he was 19th century.
Yeah.
Let me look him up. He's a fascinating figure.
I would love to do...
Dostoevsky, and a very tragic one.
I would love to go do a book club with you on two Dostoevsky books. The Idiot and the Brothers Karamazov. I'd love to do that with you.
Well, I've read Crime and Punishment, but not the Brothers book. Karamazov, I want to read that one.
Well, I also recommend The Idiot. I think it's.
I'd love to do that as a book club as well.
I think The Idiot is one of the greatest books ever. I love it.
Oh yeah. All right.
So what was Dostoevsky? We'll wrap this up now with this last thought.
He died in 1881.
Yeah.
Dostoevsky was before Twain.
Fair enough.
Their comparative era, but then he died in 1881.
Yeah.
And Twain lived on into the 20th century.
Nice.
So.
Yeah. So similar eras.
But yeah, these chapters. Yeah, these chapters have similar narrative. Well, not narrative, but narrator techniques and tone there.
I agree.
I think Twain probably did read some of the Dostoevsky if they were translated, and he probably ended up using some of the similar techniques in almost the same feel or energy around his narrator. I don't know if that's a good... I'm having a hard time explaining myself.
No.
There's a feel to the disapproving narrator.
When you read these things, there's a resonance, and it doesn't mean it's the same. You just feel something, and I totally understand what you're saying. I think you're explaining it quite well. It's the feeling you can't explain, and everyone knows that. They don't know how to explain it. There's like deja vu or any of those sort of like moments. The je ne sais quoi in life. The French have that saying. They've so well put it.
Right, je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, it's perfect. Okay, let's wrap that up there because we've finished book 1. We will come back to this in a couple of weeks' time and review, start the review of book 2. And we invite everyone, just come along, be a part of it, have your say, have your comments, tell us what you think. Are you reading along with us? Remember, if you're not reading and you haven't read the book and you don't have time to go out and buy the book, just stick me on in your earphones. The link will be in the Brothers or Canadian Culture or Joseph, however you refer to him. It'll be in his description, so you can come and listen in to both part 1 and part 2 of book 1, and just enjoy this with us and have your say. Don't be scared of any of your opinions. There are no wrong opinions, because who of us has the right to tell you you're right and wrong? Neither of us are in Twain's head. We're just guessing.
Exactly.
Anyway, thank you so much, Joseph. I've really enjoyed this hour.
Thank you.
Or just under an hour. And we'll see you next time. Last words from yourself?
No, just smash that subscribe button on all of our channels and go check out Storyfire. Seriously, the audiobook reading will be in the description on, well, if it's over here on the History Corner, and I'll be posting it over on my Storyfire.
Nice.
Because honestly, Samwise is a great reader, and his channel is great.
Thank you. I'm also,
next time.
so you can see right now, coming up on this video, you'll see a button that comes up and it says it'll be one of the 3 tip cards. And so if any of you are so inclined and you're on Storyfire and you have some blaze, feel free to tip Joseph, because we're rolling out cash out piece by piece. We've got an expansion of cash out coming in. Well, it may have already happened, but it will be coming very soon, where any tokens bought and brought into the platform will be immediately cash out able. So he'll be able to make a little bit of money on any tips you give him. And that will mean the world to him.
Woo!
Yeah, so we're expanding it, and we're also opening up merchandise. So we've got our merch store going live in a few weeks' time. It may already be out when this goes, because it takes me a little while to get these out up and running. So feel free to come and get some merch. I'm thinking about doing a t-shirt with my neck and beard in it, and maybe some key features of my face, but not my face. Because I've got what might be, let me just come up into the camera, the longest neck in all humankind. It's a giraffe neck. Okay, guys, thank you very much. See you next time. Have a great one.